Welcome to Bill and Tony's Excellent Adventure in Music. Here are your hosts, Bill Fraser and Tony Sartu.
Welcome to Bill and Tony's Excellent Adventure in Music. I'm Bill,
And I'm Tony.
and we're going to explore our love for music by sharing some facts and our thoughts about some of the best albums of all time.
Now, we're still basking in the afterglow of seeing A Complete Unknown, so we're going to talk about Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited. Now, this was the album that Dylan was working on at the end of that movie, so that's why we've selected it today.
It is a tremendous album, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
So, where was it on the Rolling Stone lists?
So, in the most recent Rolling Stone list, it was, I believe, uh,
Number 18.
number 18. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's moved around a little bit. And I, I don't know. I
Okay,
struggle with it. I struggle with it where it is. Like I think it should be higher than it is
yeah.
personally, but that's
Well, in '03 and in 2012, it was number 4 in both of those lists. So somewhere along the way, it dropped down to number 18. Look, top 20 is still great, but I think that after today, I could agree with you that maybe it should be a little higher.
yeah, I'm kind of struggling with it being on the bottom half of the top 20. So
Yeah. So my history with the album is zero. I've never listened to this album until a week or two ago. And I hadn't heard any of the songs except Like a Rolling Stone. So this was a whole brand new experience for me. How about you?
that is awesome. So it similarly, it was a new experience when I listened to it when I was doing the Rolling Stone Top 500. So when I went through the list of all the albums and I was listening to it, that was I was in the same exact situation. So, but it has become a go-to album for me. So when I listen to it there, it this and Blonde on Blonde have become go-to albums for me. I love both albums. So
Cool.
so Tone, let's tell everybody how they can reach out to us. So I love doing this segment. So just humor me, okay? They can email us, Tone.
Uh-huh.
They can reach us on email at Bill at BNT Excellent or Tony at BNT Excellent, and they can put both of us in the two. They could.
Oh,
They
all
could,
right.
right? They could reach out to us on Instagram at Bill and Tony Pod. They could reach out to us on Twitter at Bill and Tony Pod, or unintuitively, they could reach out to us on Facebook at BNT Excellent because we had to make it difficult.
Yeah.
There's always carrier pigeons. There's always smoke signals. There's a message in a bottle. There's lots of things that they could do.
Letters,
But th-
letters.
you're right. You're right. But there's lots of things that they could do. But those are the ones that would get to us the easiest.
All right. So what was going on in 1965?
So I'm going to keep it super simple. I found a great article in the Atlantic that talked about 1965. You've got Vietnam escalating, the space race in full swing. The Rolling Stones were on a world tour. You've got the United States occupying the Dominican Republic. Malcolm X was assassinated. The Mariner 4 flew by Mars. There were race riots that erupted in Watts, and Muhammad Ali beat Sonny Liston. It was a lot going on in 1965.
It was a crazy time, and that also reflects in pop culture too. The top 5 movies of 1965 were The Sound of Music, Dr. Zhivago, Thunderball, and then number 5 was something called That Darn Cat. Never heard of That Darn Cat, but I mean, just you got those first 3 and then That Darn Cat. It was kind of strange. And what was going on TV?
So TV, it was the golden age of television in
Yeah.
1965. You've got like some of the best old television shows of all time. Bonanza, Gomer Pyle, The Lucy Show, not I Love Lucy, but The Lucy Show, The Red Skelton Hour, Batman, The Andy Griffith Show, Bewitched, The Beverly Hillbillies, and Hogan's Heroes.
This
Just an
was
amazing,
basically
amazing.
this was WTBS 1981.
Yeah. So this was when I used to watch Pix 11 and on my black and white television, I'd be watching these shows. So
Hmm. Now, the year in music. So the top 10 albums, the top 10 selling albums of the year. 7 of them were the Beatles or Bob Dylan. Number 1 was the Sound of Music soundtrack. Number 2 was Rubber Soul, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. 3 was A Charlie Brown Christmas, the soundtrack for that. 4 was Help. 5 was Beatles 65. 6 was Highway 61 Revisited. 7 was A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. Number 8 was Bring It All Back Home by Bob Dylan. And number 9, The Early Beatles. Number 10, Beatles 6. So, um, you know, we're deep into Beatlemania already,
Oh
but
yeah.
I didn't realize that in the midst of Beatlemania, that Dylan was right there too. And we'll
Yeah,
talk
he was
about that in a little bit.
very prolific in 65. So yeah.
Yeah. So then some of the number one songs, oh, I'm sorry, the number one album. So those were the top sellers. Number one albums, there was an Elvis album at number one, a couple of Beatles albums, the Goldfinger soundtrack, Mary Poppins, um, The Sound of Music, and a couple of Rolling Stones songs or Rolling Stones albums. And then as far as the singles go, we've got Wooly Bully was the number one single of the year. So in a world where the Rolling Stones have Satisfaction out and they're touring the world, the Beatles are deep in Beatlemania. You've got the Beach Boys with Help Me Rhonda and Righteous Brothers with Unchained Melody, the Supremes with Stop in the Name of Love. I Got You Babe from Sonny and Cher, the number one song, Wooly Bully.
It's a good song.
I mean, it's not like a Rolling Stone. So anyway, those were the singles and the albums of the year.
All right, so why don't we talk a little bit about the album itself and how it was recorded before we get into our some things you might not know.
For sure.
So the album was released August 30th of 1965 by Columbia Records, and it was recorded in two different sessions with two different producers. The first producer was Tom Wilson, the second producer was Bob Johnston, and you've got different backing performers. There's a little bit of overlap, but you've got different backing performers in the different sessions. So I'm not sure if you want to get into the backing performers of it, but
Yeah, we'll just run through them real quick. So in the first block of sessions, which were on June 15 and 16, you had Michael Bloomfield on lead guitar, Frank Owens on rhythm guitar, Bobby Gregg on drums, Joe Macho Jr. on bass, and Paul Griffin on piano. And then on day 2 of that first block of recording was Al Cooper on the organ. Now, in the second block, which took place on June 29 through August 1st, you had the same lineup, except someone named Harvey Brooks replaced Joe Macho on bass. So, Bill, you want to tell us about the cover art? That's kind of your forte, your specialty.
so it was photographed by Daniel Kramer, and it's um, basically a picture of Dylan. And personally, I don't think it stands out very much. I think some of his other album covers stand out a lot more. I think it's a cool album cover, but it's not something that for me is an incredibly dynamic and whatnot album cover. You've got, the guy standing behind him with the camera dangling and whatnot, but I personally don't think it's a particularly dynamic album cover.
So I've never seen this album cover until, a couple of days ago. What I wonder is his look, you know, an important part of that story because the look that, he has is like, Ray-Bans, this motorcycle t-shirt. Um, is he like looking different than maybe what the Pete Seegers or the, folk community might have looked like then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely plays to the difference of it. But you know, going to what we talked about on the Complete Unknown pod, I I personally didn't differentiate between the electric Dylan and the
Yeah.
non-electric Dylan. So for me, my frame of reference looking at it, I didn't get that, but I can understand that angle to it, and
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so how about something you might not know?
So you want to start us off with your couple of tidbits?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. So the first one is, and they did this in the movie, just very. I loved how they dramatized it in the movie. They did it in like 15 seconds, just basically a glance, but it's really pretty cool. And that's Al Cooper. So Al Cooper was not even on the first day of recording in session one. So on June 15th, he wasn't there. The producer, Tom Wilson, invited him to just sit in on day two, just to hang around, just to be around everybody, but he wanted to take a shot. And you got to respect somebody, when you got a shot and you take it, and who knows what might happen? What's the worst that could happen? So what he does is he's a guitar player. He jumps in and doesn't play organ, but has an idea. They're only working on Like a Rolling Stone. They're not doing anything else. They're just working on Like a Rolling Stone. He has an idea for it. And on day one, if you, I listened to the Cutting Edge, which is all the outtakes from back
That was
then.
one of the things I wanted to talk about. It was very interesting listening to that. Yes.
Day one, there's no organ because Al Cooper wasn't there. Day two, all of a sudden, the organ's all over the place. And it's because he jumped in there, had an idea, and Dylan loved it. And what's really cool about it is, so he had an enormous impact on one of the most important songs of all time. But he clearly made a connection with Dylan that day because after that second day, they took a break, and Bob and Al Cooper, the two of them, went up to Woodstock to work on chord progressions for the rest of the songs on the album. So this guy who didn't know Dylan from a hole in the wall on June 15th is heavily involved in creating the music for the rest of the album. I think it's an incredible story.
It is a great story. Yeah.
Do you want me to do my next one, or do you want to do one?
I'll take one now. So,
Okay.
obviously everybody knows that Bob Dylan is not his real name. It's Robert Allen Zimmerman. And one of the things that I didn't know is he actually played with a bunch of different names. So he wasn't sure what he was going to use as a name. It wasn't going to be Robert Zimmerman. So he thought about using um, Robert Allen. He liked the way that sounded and really thought about that. He played with a few different spellings from Bob Dylan. It was originally Dillon, and then I think he hat tipped in his book Chronicles that he loved the writer Dylan Thomas and the spelling, and he went with that spelling to have something different, which I think is pretty cool. But Elston Gunn was a name that he used, and Gunn with three N's, Gunnn. Okay, so he used the name Elston Gunn, and that was like his first alter ego. And Elston Gunn showed up in Fargo, North Dakota. He was a dishwasher at the Red Apple Cafe in Fargo, North Dakota in 1959. And Bobby V, who was a famous pop singer, or would go on to become a famous pop singer, shows up at the Red Apple Cafe. And Bob Dylan walks up to him and his entourage and sells himself as Elston Gunn with three N's. And I'm a piano player, and you need a piano player, and I'm going to play on your album. And they take him and they try him out, and they're like, "Yeah, he's really good as long as he plays in C. He can't play anything else but in C." But I just found it absolutely fascinating that he liked playing with the different names, and he even played as Elston Gunn in other bands as well. So
That's a great story, really, in not pairing with the Al Cooper story, right? That's taking your shot. And he did it, and I wonder if, like, knowing that Elston Gunn story in the back of his head, like respected what Cooper did, and
I,
and
I think there was definitely some
I
of
can
that there.
imagine
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah, 100%.
All right. My second one is talking about the Beatles, and I mentioned Rubber Soul before. And again, having no history with Dylan, but knowing the Beatles all my life, I always thought of the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and Led Zeppelin, basically from NEW telling us those were the big four. Um, and so that's what I was taught, so that's what I believed. Didn't ever think of Dylan in that class, but he's so incredibly important specifically to the Beatles, but not just the Beatles, but um, right now we're in 1964, and Dylan just comes out with another side of Bob Dylan. And it was when he started, moving away from the traditional folk. And um, it's still not electric, but it's moving away from the protest songs and stuff like that. And the folk purists didn't like it, but you know who liked it? The Beatles liked it. They met Dylan for the first time in August of 64. And after that meeting, they said, you know what? We like what he's doing. We want to incorporate what he does into what we do. Meanwhile, Dylan's having the same exact thinking like, man, you know what? I like what these guys are doing, the Beatles. I want to start moving in that direction. So that's pushing him to bring in the electric. So then he does bring it all back home, and that is not well received by the folk community. But the Beatles loved it. And it was that electric instrumentation that he took from them. They were on tour in the US doing that Shea Stadium tour where they sold out and had 55,000 people there. And then they met up with Dylan shortly after that. And that's when they really connected. And Dylan is rumored to have gotten them super high on pot that
Yeah,
night.
yeah. Supposedly he introduced Ringo to marijuana. Yeah,
Yeah. But then all of that experience, they take that back to them when they do Rubber Soul. And Rubber Soul, people call that Beatles, that's the Beatles folk album. And in fact, they had two versions of that album, the UK version and the US version. And in the US version, they put in um, songs that they thought would be more folky because they were trying to capture that whole Bob Dylan vibe. So they had I've Just Seen a Face and It's Only Love on the US version, but on the UK version, they had Drive My Car and Nowhere Man. And those are different songs, and it could change the tone of the album.
yeah. Well, I think, and you've talked about this before, when talking about skiffle. The whole skiffle angle, I think, is real too because it's very much bluesy, and the Beatles skiffle angle, I think, influenced Dylan as well.
Oh,
So you've got some reciprocity going on
exactly.
in actually making artists better. You've got them appreciating him and him appreciating them and pushing each other to do things a little differently and stretch. And I think it was wonderful.
And it's not just the Beatles and Dylan. So you got the Who. Pete Townsend writes My Generation this same year as all of this is going on, and he has said that the lyrics for My Generation were directly inspired by Dylan and the folk rock that he was doing.
Well, and the Stones album that came out in early 65 before Highway 61 Revisited has a lot of the same rockabilly and bluesy stuff. So you've got a lot of artists starting to swim into that
Hmm.
lane, a
Yeah.
lot. So
All right. So that's what I have.
all right, I got one more, and then maybe a bonus that we could talk about. So, all right, so we talked about the two producers on the album of session A and session B, or session one and session two. Tom Wilson being the producer who actually did the recording of Like a Rolling Stone that was released as a single, and the same single version made it onto the album. But when they came back to do the album in total, um, it was a different producer. It was Bob Johnston, and there are a lot of theories as to why that's the case. I think the one theory I read is that the manager fired uh, Tom Wilson because he didn't think him and Dylan were getting along, and I think the whole Al Cooper of it actually was a bit of a argument between Dylan and Tom Wilson, and I don't think it particularly they were on the same page necessarily. They eventually got to the same page, but I don't think they were on the same page, and there was some struggle there. So whatever the case may be, Tom Wilson gets sacked. They bring in Bob Johnston. Bob Johnston finishes the album. Bob Johnston then goes on a run with Dylan. He does the rest of 61 Revisited, he does Blonde on Blonde, John Wesley Harding, Nashville Skyline, Self Portrait, and New Morning. He does the next 5 albums with Dylan. What else does Bob Johnston do? Well, just like Tom Wilson got replaced by Bob Johnston with Dylan, Tom Wilson went on to work with Simon and Garfunkel and recorded a little song called "The Sounds of Silence," the single. And guess who didn't finish the album with Simon and Garfunkel, and who did finish the album with Simon and Garfunkel? The same Tom Wilson did "Sounds of Silence" single, and Bob Johnston finished the album with Simon and Garfunkel. Same exact
Oh
thing.
man.
And Tom Wilson, if you look at his career, he's got just this brilliant career of working with these artists and getting this amazing stuff out of them, but he didn't finish it. Like, and for whatever reason, because he rubbed people the wrong way, or they were intimidated by him. I mean, there was a racial component to it that, I think he maybe didn't get treated fairly because, he's a black man in a time that maybe it wasn't quite as friendly to black record executives and whatnot. He also worked with the Velvet Underground, and he did a lot of work on the album the Velvet Underground and Nico, but not all of it. So he's got just an amazing recording career, but I think he isn't appreciated as much as he could. And I know there was a little bit of a conflict on him not getting into the Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as early as he could have, and whatnot. And I think he had a brilliant career. So I just found the dynamic of him being replaced by Johnston twice on 2 different like powerhouse albums just absolutely amazing.
So until 90 seconds ago, I didn't realize that Tom Wilson was a black man. And I think it's super, first of all, super crappy, but interesting because, I think Andy Warhol got credit as the producer on the Velvet Underground record, but
he did.
He didn't. I doubt that he did a whole lot of
The
producing.
mixing and everything was Tom Wilson. Yes.
Yeah, and it was probably all Wilson. And God, dang, that I can't imagine how angry I'd be.
Yeah. So I found that like just something I didn't know at all, and I'm like, wow, like just a different time. The other little tidbit is, who else Bob Johnston produced? Johnny Cash. At Folsom Prison and his At San Quentin, Bob Johnston produced both of those albums.
See, now that's where, I'm gonna say maybe it isn't, nefarious, because the rest of Highway 61 Revisited, the Johnston produced album, sounds like a Johnny Cash. A lot of it sounds like a Johnny Cash record.
No, agreed. But it was Folsom Prison 3 years after. So he worked with Johnny Cash after he worked with Dylan. He worked with Dylan and then went on to work with Johnny Cash. Folsom Prison was 68.
Huh. Okay. All right. Well, good stuff. Thank you for that, Bill.
All right. I have one more tidbit, one more quick
bonus.
Right? One more bonus. Okay. So 1965, you mentioned that Dylan is spending different time with different artists and whatnot. He did go to Britain for a tour in early 65 in like May-ish. So before he recorded either of the sessions, he was in England, and he booked studio time in London. He booked studio time with a band that we've talked about before, John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Okay. And who was the guitarist, the 20-year-old guitarist for John Mayall's Blues Breakers when he booked time with them in the studio to play around and putt around and work things out in the studio?
Was it one of the Stones?
It was a 20-year-old Eric Clapton.
Oh,
so 20-year-old Eric Clapton was putting around working with him in the studio. And the quote that Clapton said, "It did not go well." He's like, "Stop playing this BB King crap. I don't want to hear it."
Oh, that's what Clapton was saying, or that's what Dylan was saying?
That's what Dylan was saying.
Uh-huh.
And even when he came back and they sat, with the first sessions with
Bloomberg,
with the the guitarist from Paul Butterfield band, he basically said the same thing. He's like, I don't want this BB King blues stuff. I want to play my stuff. And he like went off, and he basically had the exact same experience in the UK with Clapton that he did the first sessions with recording in post like Rolling Stone.
Well, that was a cool bonus, something you didn't know. All right, so let's get going here. So what we do next is we just go through the album track and do a brief discussion on the tracks, right?
You got it.
All right, so leading off is Like a Rolling Stone. And this is, at times has been called or rated the number one most important rock and roll song in history. Um, and it's an incredible song. I just I haven't been able to get enough of listening to it, having not listened to it all my life.
I'm in the same boat. So I can listen to this album like anytime. And specifically the first couple of tracks I can just listen to over and over and over again. And like a Rolling Stone is so powerful. You know, the the lyrics really are just easy to kind of sink into, and you've got good times aren't permanent, and he tells this story of disillusionment and whatnot, and it's so amazing. The other thing that I found interesting and is that when he originally wrote the song, it was like 20 pages, and he actually wrote it to the chord breaks and progressions of La Bamba by Richie Valens.
Is that
And if you
true?
listen to it and you do it, you can hear it's to the
Well,
breaks. It's
don't
it's
don't let the Richie Valens estate hear about this. So the thing that I found interesting was I watched well, tying in some of the things that you're talking about. So when he was on tour for the Bring It All Back Home tour in Britain, and I mentioned how it wasn't terribly well received, like the some of the electric stuff, and he was catching heat for that. He was getting really bitter about that and how he felt like he was getting hemmed in, and that bitterness comes out in a lot of these songs and definitely in this one. And what I found really interesting was I watched a lot of the Scorsese documentary. What is it? No Direction Home.
yeah,
So I watched some of that, and particularly the parts right around that tour, and also after this song came out and he's performing it, and the all the video of him performing this, he is like screaming the lyrics. He is pissed. He's angry compared to the recorded version, which I think is a great vocal performance. I mean, a great
I,
vocal
I
performance.
agreed.
But
But I think you're right. A lot of what he was feeling at the time came out in this album,
yeah.
and he's been quoted as saying that he like didn't want to play the crap that he was playing, and people want these things, and we saw it in the movie.
Mhm.
The fans wanted him to play the things that were
Tambourine
on his
Man.
on his on his first albums that made him famous, and
Yeah.
he didn't want to. He wanted to evolve. He really what I didn't understand, and I do now, and I have a much better appreciation for it, is him and Bowie have a lot of similarities of they were constantly evolving and always wanted to evolve. And Dylan had the same type of characters over the
Hmm.
course of his career. And I didn't understand that. Like I didn't get it. Like I think when I thought of him before I really started listening to him, I kind of lumped all of his music together and I'm like, oh yeah, he's that folky guy that, plays some cool songs and whatnot. And that's not who I get, and that's not who I get on this song. And the can you imagine this song without the organ? I mean, hearing the release of the deep cuts in that
Hmm.
set, the absolutely amazing. They've got all of the demo tracks where you can just listen to the different versions, and even some with like where they started playing the organ, but it's not quite what it was. And uh, it's really fascinating how they built that song and how it got to what it was. And I can't imagine the song without it.
They had one C because this came out in CD, back in the day. There was one CD, so like 45 minutes, just different takes of this song. And and I listened to the whole thing, and it was really, really cool to see that progression.
Yeah, no, agreed.
All right, so next up is Tombstone Blues.
This is such a great, fast, cool blues rock song. Like it's got an amazing beat. The guitar solos in the breaks are awesome. And that's one of the things where, like, Dylan, backed by these multiple instrumentalists that are all really good on this album, it's the first time it's not just Dylan with the guitar. And
Hmm.
even take the electric out of it. This is the first album where it's Dylan backed by a band, and you really really get that on this track. You really
Hmm.
get it.
Yeah. Any lyrics that you uh particularly like?
The sun isn't yellow, it's chicken. That's my favorite line in the song.
So I love verse three is my the whole verse three is great, and that's my favorite line in the song. But I think the first stanza of verse three is cool. Is John the Baptist, after torturing a thief, looks up at the hero, the commander in chief, saying, "Tell me, great hero, but please make it brief. Is there a hole for me to get sick in?" I haven't, researched any of this, but my reading of that is that's like a soldier in war, you know, talking to the president, his commander in chief, whatever, but just disgusted by what he's done, you know? And then when we get to the second stanza, commander in chief answers him while chasing a fly, death to all those who would whimper and cry. And dropping a barbell, he points to the sky, saying, the sun's not yellow, it's chicken. To me, that dropping a barbell, remember, we're in Cuban Missile Crisis time. Nuclear annihilation is on the horizon. That's dropping a bomb. I think that that's what he's talking about. And then, the sun's not yellow, it's chicken. In that context, I don't know. I think that the music's so cool. That particular verse is so cool. I love this song.
I love the lyrics in the song. Like this song, I could listen to over and over and over again. Like I said, the first two songs on this album might be the best first two songs on any album that I've ever listened to.
So, look, so we both love both those songs. Let's try and ramp it up here with the next couple.
All
So we've
right.
got It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry. I'll go first. For me, um, this is not a terribly interesting song. It's nice. It's a good song, but compared to the first two, it's a little more pedestrian.
So you get for me, it's the you get the country mid-tempo blues that feels a lot like what the Rolling Stones will wind up doing in '69 on Country Honk. Um, so it feels like he influenced them a little bit, and whatnot. Whereas they also influenced him. Um, it's a good song, but it's not it, it's not the first two. So,
Mhm.
but I love it. It's a great song.
All right, so next is Buick 6. So for me, these two are probably the weak part of the album for me. Uh,
It's another rockabilly song. Like
mhm.
it's a little bit more up tempo rock and roll rockabilly.
Yeah.
It's a good song, but
The only thought that I had listening to Buick 6 is it sounded a little Beatlesy. Definitely not the vocal, but if I tune out the vocal and listen to the music, I can hear some Beatles influence in there. But apart from that, you know, what if I go down dying? She's bound to put a blanket on me on my bed. That recurring line, I guess it's supposed to be about, true love or unconditional love, whatever.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you know, it's a fine song.
yep.
Next, we've got Ballad of a Thin Man.
Another awesome song.
The song's cool.
So I love Ballad of a Thin Man. It's a slow blues rock and roll track that's just got a very amazing vibe to it, and the whole something is happening and you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? That just keep circling back to. I really love that song.
This song is so cool. And verse three, I would never have understood, or I shouldn't, my take on this. I didn't, I don't know what people say are the real meanings here, but if I hadn't seen Nightmare Alley a couple years ago, that's the Bradley Cooper movie, I wouldn't have understood or had an interpretation for verse three. Verse three, you hand in your ticket and you go watch The Geek. Now, The Geek is like a subhuman person that does like weird things, like eats live animals and things like that. And then this verse, you watch the geek who immediately walks up to you, and you are Mr. Jones, walks up to you when he hears you speak and says, how does it feel to be such a freak? The vision of the geek saying to the Mr. Jones character, how does it feel to be such a freak? And Mr. Jones says impossible as he hands you a bone. Like so he's eating like a raw rabbit and then handing Mr. Jones's the visual is amazing.
Well, this song is particularly powerful because this is Dylan's frustration with the fans. Like it comes out in this song. Like you don't know, you can't appreciate my music. All you want is the old stuff. Like something's happening and you don't know what it is, Mr. Jones. Like it really comes out in this song.
That's my favorite verse, but a hilarious line. It's almost like somebody made him a bet. Can you somehow say tax deductible charity organization in a song? Yes, I can.
Yes. Hold my beer.
Yeah. All right. So next is Queen Jane approximately.
It's a really good song. I think that it's really, the whole angle of the fall from grace and the who is this song about, is fascinating. There's, is it about Joan Baez? Is it about Jane Seymour? He's been quoted as saying it's not about a woman, it's about a man, um, which is another fascinating angle.
He's also known to not be
Lie.
terribly truthful.
Yeah.
So here's I went so I did look up one piece of information or do one theory. So, the Joan Baez angle and talking about how Dylan and Baez had been at times called the king and queen of folk music. So, so keeping that in mind, I then kind of went a little English major on this one and I looked at all five verses, and the third line in each of these verses are these: that you're tired of yourself and all your creations, and all of your children start to resent you, and you're sick of all this repetition, trying to prove that your conclusion should be more drastic, and you want somebody you don't have to speak to. I love this notion of him basically saying, and then the approximately part, Jane is approximately Joan. I mean, this all fits. And then when you think about those five lines from each of those five verses, he could be saying that, come with me. You know, don't be stuck in the folk world. Come on this journey with me, and we can do a whole bunch of cool stuff. You don't have to just be in this endless loop playing the same stuff over and over again. That's my take. I like this song better with that take in my mind.
I- you know, n- Putting a story behind it, I enjoy the song more. Yeah,
Oh, and one last
but it's
thing
a great.
is
But I like this. I enjoy the song.
every time that song starts, I feel like it sounds like a Bruce song a little bit. Listen to it. There's just that the first like, 4 or 8 bars, and it sounds like a Bruce song.
Or Bruce sounds like.
Well, that you get my point.
I get a similar vibe on another song coming up. So,
Yeah,
but from a different artist.
oh,
So
all right.
yeah,
Okay, so anything else there on Queen Jane?
I do not.
Highway 61 Revisited. What do you got, Bill?
It's such a fun song. I think this is one of the songs that stands out to me on the album. Obviously, the use of the whistle and whatnot, but the whole upbeat, fast tempo, again, very rockabilly-ish. You get a lot of that in this song, and it's it's just a very very fun song. And it's one that stays with you.
Um, I think that that first verse, is just a cool retelling of the biblical tale. That's just a neat way to start the song. And then the fifth verse ends with basically them, you know, um, the powers that be talking about starting World War. And what are we gonna do? Oh, we can get that's easily done. We just got to put some bleachers out in the sun. Um, I know, cool lines, and it's weird to think about, how their world view was so colored by, the potential of nuclear annihilation, and maybe we'd be smart to to worry about that a little bit more nowadays.
Everything old is new again.
Okay. And now we have Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues.
So every time I hear this song, I'm like Bob Seger, his whole career, he stole from this song. Like I hear every Bob Seger song when I hear this song. It's very much that.
Give me one.
I, all Bob Seger music like mishmashes in
I see
my
what you're
head.
saying.
So
So it's
it's
not a
like
particular.
it's
It's
not a
it's
particular
it's the
song. It's just like
tone. It's
the
the
piano and like the way that it comes together. It like it could be Night Moves. It could be like it could be
uh,
any like I hear like, oh, Bob Seger kind of built a career off of doing music pretty much exactly like that.
um. So I like this song. Not as much as others. One line that I thought was particularly good was in verse 4. It's either fortune or fame. You must pick one or the other, though neither of them are what they claim. I think that's a pretty cool line.
Yeah. No, it's a fun song. I mean, it's the lyrics are cool. And enjoyed it.
And now we get to the end,
The non-electric track
the 11-minute non-electric track, Desolation Row.
that they recorded electric on one of the demos. But thankfully they went back and didn't do it electric.
Yeah, no, this sounds great the way it is. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean the, the fact that I can sit and enjoy an 11-minute and 21-second song speaks volumes to how special it is, because it's kind of hard to sit and listen to a song that's that long. And there are very few songs that I can actually make it through without just being like, okay, come on, that it's really a moving song in my mind. Like it's deep, it's dark, and it's moving.
It's definitely dark, that's for sure. And yeah, I when I first started listening to this album, I I was like thrown off because I didn't realize it was 11 minutes, but I just kept like, oh, this thing is still going. But I wasn't, just to your point, I wasn't like mad about it. I just was like, this feels like it's been going on a while. And then I looked down, it's like 9 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. 9 minutes and counting. Yes.
Yeah. So it's the precursor to All Too Well 10-minute version.
Exactly.
Another song that I don't get tired of. So, but to be honest, I don't have any particular lyric, considering that there's, so many verses. None of them by themselves stand out. I think it's just the whole picture altogether.
I think it is the pastiche that gets put together through the whole song. I agree.
All right. So we made it through the song review. So it's time for we're near the end.
All right, we got to bring it on home and do our draft quickly. So, Tone, you want to remind our fans very quickly what our song draft is?
Okay, the song draft is what we do is we take turns picking songs from the album, and each of us is going to have a lineup or roster of songs from the album. There's 9 tracks on this one, so we're each going to pick 4 songs. So one song's going to be left out, and we are having a contest to see whose 4 songs are going to be better than the other. Now, traditionally, I screw this up. Bill always does a good job, but as often as he does a good job, I do horrific jobs. So part of the game is, how badly am I going to screw this up? Am I going to screw it up at all? Let's see. And what we do is we're going to start something new. We're going to start with a coin toss.
And I have a regulation quarter here. There's the heads,
Very
and
good.
there is the tails.
And then we're going to determine the pick order for the draft. So do you want to go ahead and toss?
Well, and Tone,
Oh.
we decided today that whoever picks first, the next person will pick second and third, and then we'll continue on.
Well, yeah, exactly. But whoever wins the toss gets to choose
Gets to
if they pick
choose.
first
All
or
right, so
second or third.
I will flip the coin.
Okay.
You will call. Okay.
Okay. Heads.
It is heads.
All right. Um, I'm gonna pick first because I have to get like a Rolling Stone. But
Um,
this is one where you don't get terribly hurt by picking second.
Yeah, I
especially
mean,
in this new
but you just
format.
picked what could be considered the best song of all time as your
Yeah,
first choice, which is like, yeah, that's a pretty good choice.
yeah.
I'm gonna pick Tombstone Blues as my first choice, pick number
Hmm.
two, and I am going to go with uh, the Ballad of a Thin Man with my three.
So we had the same top three. Um, I think I'm going to go, and this isn't where I was yesterday, but I'm going to go Queen Jane now.
Wow,
And this is where I always lose.
wow, Queen Jane, very interesting. Um, I am gonna go Highway 61 Revisited.
I'm going to go Desolation Row.
Yeah, that was my other possible choice. Um, I am going to go. It takes a lot to laugh.
And I'm going to go Tom Thumb.
All right, so Tony selected Like a Rolling Stone first. I went second and third and took Tombstone Blues and Ballad of a Thin Man. Tony went fourth and picked Queen Jane. I went fifth and picked Highway 61 Revisited. Tony at six picked Desolation Row. At seven, I took It Takes a Lot to Laugh. And at eight, wrapping up our song draft, Tony picked just like Tom Thumb's Blues.
All right. So I love my slate of songs. So, you know, I think neither of us is going to lose today.
There are no losers with this album.
Yeah.
There are no losers with this album.
All right. So, final thoughts. You want to go first, Bill?
Sure. I, I find myself moved every time I listen to this album. I think Dylan's writing is so powerful that I kind of vacillate between listening to the lyrics and just enjoying the music,
Hmm.
which is a very it's a cool thing when you can actually get an album where you want to do both. And I can't always do both at the same time. Sometimes I, want to just focus on the words, and sometimes I want to listen to the music. And I tend to find myself a lot on this album alternating between the two, which I don't really think plays out a lot for me on a lot of other albums. I think on a lot of other albums, I'm either listening to the lyrics and trying to enjoy the lyrics, or I'm listening to the music. And I don't really feel like that plays out a lot on a lot of albums, but it does for me on this one. I'm I've become such a huge Dylan fan, and the run of albums that he does, um, you know, th- starting from the album before this
Hmm.
through Blonde on Blonde, um, the 4 or 5 albums that he does in a row right before his motorcycle accident in '66 are just spectacular
Yeah.
albums. Just I mean the amount of amazing music that he put out in like 16
Five
months
years.
is
Yeah.
it, well, no, not even
Oh,
5 years, like 16 months. Like the amount of recording that he did for that album run is just insane. And I love his music, and I've become an enormous Bob Dylan fan. So I can't say enough great things about this album.
so I'm not, at that level. I haven't actually explored the discography, so I've really just been focused on this album. But I am looking forward to particularly that run that you're talking about. I think that that's going to be the sweet spot that I'm going to be homing in on. But definitely just a new found appreciation for this American master.
So I always tell you where I rank albums when we wrap up.
Mhm.
So
Oh,
this
wait,
one's a
before
hard,
you hold on.
yeah, okay.
But here's what almost, I don't want to say invariably, but frequently happens is Billy, a lot of recency bias. We dig into an album and all of a sudden it's shooting up your list and So tell me, did this shoot up your list like
So
all the
so
rest
it,
of them?
it so it did. I actually flip-flopped it. It moved up 3 spots. So it had been my number 11. It's now my number 8. So it is. I need to redo my top 10. I think I have a couple things I'm going to change movement wise, but it's now moved up to number 8. So this is my number 8 album of all time.
Mhm.
I think it's just a phenomenal album.
All right. So I guess that's it, right? We ready to get out of here?
We are ready to get out of here.
All right. Well, then let's go. How do we end
All
this?
right.
I forget.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Please come back and listen to our next episode. We're going to be trying to do a whole lot more frequent releases. So please come back and listen.
And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.